Hey, what's up, guys? So today I'm going to be talking about Amazing Fantasy number 1000. So this isn't the actual 1000th issue, just so there's no confusion. It's basically just a celebration of Spider-Man. So there's like a variety of just different writers telling different interpretation of their own version of a Spider-Man. So it's like what I'm assuming would be this day and age's writers' interpretation of Spider-Man. So we get to see what they believe Spider-Man is like as a character moving forward, which really hasn't changed much, but they do explain the fact that, he gets tortured quite a bit, and they're not gonna hold back on any of that for any future issues. But of course, there's gonna be spoilers because I'm gonna be talking about not every single story, just the ones I like. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the ones that I didn't like and why I didn't like them. But anyways, yeah, there's gonna be spoilers. So if you haven't read it yet and you want to read it before you listen to me babble on, probably do so. Otherwise, if you don't care, if you don't plan on reading it and you just want to know what's in this, just continue listening. I don't know. But anyways, without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so my favorite story in this collection is titled Spider-Man vs. His Sinister 60th. It starts off with him fighting the Vulture, and then he receives a phone call from elderly MJ at this point. They're still together, so that's good for him. Nothing happy typically happens to Spider-Man, so it's good to hear that he's still together with MJ. But anyways, she's at a restaurant waiting for Peter Parker because they're supposed to be celebrating his birthday, but he's of course out fighting crime and he's already late. But he tells her that he's on his way, and that's something that happens every year. So he swings away, starts making his way over to MJ, when all of a sudden he sees this crime happening. So this lady's getting burglarized by this dude in an alley, and the guy has a gun. He aims it at Spider-Man, and of course, like Spider-Man does, he gets his Spider-Man senses going, but he mentions that his reflexes are very slow. They're not what they used to be. So he gets shot. The lady's freaking out at this point. She's like, "Oh god, you shot him." And the burglar is like, "Oh man, but no one ever shoots Spider-Man." It's been known that he can easily dodge bullets, so at this point I'm wondering, what the hell is happening, dude? The burglar shoots him multiple times and then runs away. So we get this giant panel where he's just on the ground bleeding out, and yeah, it's pretty gory. Pretty horrific, to be honest, but it keeps the story pretty interesting. At this point, we cut to MJ, where she's still waiting at the restaurant, which just happens to have a giant TV running with the news, which is kind of weird for a fancy restaurant. You don't typically see that, except at maybe a bar where the TVs are there, but not where you sit and eat, But anyways, the news is basically saying how Spider-Man has been shot and is severely injured and probably is not going to recover from that. So we cut to him in the ambulance, and they're about to remove his mask, but then another person's like, "Yo, you don't do that to Spider-Man." And the other, person that was trying to remove the mask goes, "Oh, but I gotta see if his pupils are dilated, his eyes, But he's like, "Nah, dude, we don't do that with Spider-Man," which is a pretty cool thing about this story I like. And at this point, Spider-Man's just thinking he's thinking of all the different possible ways that he could have died throughout his life, right? It could have been the Sinister Six, it could have been Carnage, it could have been the Green Goblin, but eventually it was just a burglar, that just shot him in an alley. And he thinks it almost feels right because that's how Uncle Ben died. And then we cut to him being in the hospital bed for a few days, and he wonders why no one has visited him. He would assume the Avengers, the other Spider-Man would show up and acknowledge the fact that he's probably gonna die. But the doctors assure him that there are people waiting for him. And then they cut to basically outside of his room, where there's a line full of just New Yorkers that have been saved or know a relative that has been saved by Spider-Man. So they're all there trying to tell him the story of how each one got saved. And then at this point, we get this elderly lady, again, walks up to Spider-Man, and he's like, "Oh, how did I save you?" Don't know if he realizes that's MJ. But anyways, she leans down and whispers in his ear, and he explains how, no, you got that wrong. Those are all the ways you saved me. And she walks out of the room, and the next guy starts walking in and instantly starts explaining the story of how Spider-Man saved him. When you get this flat line right, a panel showing the flatlining, so you're thinking like, oh crap, dude, he's kicking the bucket, holy crap. But the room is empty when they show it. He's gone. And this leads you to believe, oh, he probably saw like a crime or something happen outside of his window, and he just had to jump out and stop it, right? Yeah, that's exactly what happens. He's in like his hospital gown with his ass out, but he has a Spider-Man mask on, stopping this burglar from robbing this lady. And of course, the doctors acknowledge this happening, and they're like, yeah, he's basically ready to go. Should we write down that this lady is his? The doctor cuts him out. He's like, nah, dude, don't write anything. We don't do that for Spider-Man. So these doctors are pretty cool. They're like, acknowledging that he has a secret identity, and they're not trying to mess with that. And then we cut to elderly MJ and Peter just sitting there eating leftover food that, got cold that other night. And apparently they have this little dog with them, so that's a pretty cute ending to this story. I really liked it because it was like a concept over what it would be like if Spider-Man was old, and how he would still go out of his way even after being in like the hospital bed for some days. He still jumps out to try to stop this lady from getting mugged. So that was a pretty cool story. So the next story that I really liked is actually a sequel to a story that was in Amazing Fantasy number 15. So I'm gonna give some quick context into that first story real quick so that this other one kind of makes sense. So the story in Amazing Fantasy number 15 is titled Man in the Mummy Case. So it's just this dude named Rocco Rank who's running away from this police guy who's, of course, coming after him for some crime that he committed. And he jumps in through a window, lands into a museum. This mummy inside of the museum explains to him, like, yo, dude, I can, like, hide you and make you disappear from your pursuers if you want. And so the guy's like, oh man, I have no option, okay. So the mummy has him go into this mummy coffin, and then the cops show up, and they acknowledge that there could be a guy hiding in the coffin. So, of course, they open it, and there's nothing there. You're probably thinking like, oh shit, what the hell happened to him? So the cops walk away, and the mummy opens the coffin again to reveal that, yeah, there's nothing there. And then it's revealed that the guy got transported back to ancient Egypt, and now he's like a slave helping to put these pyramids together. I didn't read that story previously because, of course, I just bought like this facsimile of Amazing Fantasy just to read the Spider-Man. So now it actually gave me a reason to like go through and read the other stories just for the lulz. But yeah, that's context into that story, which brings us into this Celebration story, which is a sequel to that. And then we get a sequel to that story in this one titled Slaves of the Witch Queen, where the first panel is her flying out on a glider looking thing with a ton of like mummies and Egyptian warriors coming out saying that they're about to enslave everything, when Spider-Man shows up and beats up a ton of the warriors in front of her. And then she starts explaining her origin, and she starts off by talking about how her crops failed, people began to die or flee. Her land was basically just gonna die out, so she used, I'm assuming, magic to like raise the dead and have these guys just like walk around throughout time and space to try to seek out very desperate people to trick into transporting them back into this Egyptian time period, which is what happened with the guy, in the previous story. As she's hanging out, she eventually hears a story that this guy keeps talking about of how there's air conditioning where he lives, there's hot pockets, indoor plumbing is a big thing that he talks about, and he ends up piquing her curiosity to the point where she opens the portal through the coffin that he came through and feels enticed to rule the land, because he's talking mad. He's like hyping up New York, basically the place he came from. So she's like, yeah, why don't I just rule it? Who cares? But then Spider-Man throws her through this glass ceiling, breaks it, and then she is examining the world, New York. She's seeing how there's a ton of cars. All the people are eating like unhealthy, which would make them very poor slave material. And then she sees like these flying jets and gets amazed by them. And Spider-Man is explaining how he's not the only one with superpowers. There are way bigger, more powerful, beings that could potentially just stop her if she is planning on conquering New York or the whole world. So Spider-Man ends up using his speech 100 skill and basically talks her into going back through where she came from, sending all of the warriors and mummies back through the coffin. And as he webs up the coffin to seal it off and then give it off to Doctor Strange to handle with, I guess, you get to see Rocco from the previous story. He's trying to escape through the window, but Spider-Man webs him up and starts talking to him about how he's gonna get the cops on him, and that's pretty much it for that story. It's a pretty simple one, for sure. I like the fact that it's a sequel to this very old story. I guess no one was asking for it, but these guys went out of their way to make a sequel to it, even though originally it didn't have Spider-Man in it, but they incorporated the Spider-Man character into it, which was pretty cool. And they made the Witch Queen look like, like just another goblin, basically. I think the previous run, before the one that I'm currently reading, had like a witch goblin character. I'm pretty sure that's where the inspiration for this one comes from, probably. But anyways, that's the second story that I liked. The next story I liked was titled You Get It. This one I somewhat liked. It has no real context as to what's happening. It's just something that happened. So Spider-Man is just like, the one we know, 616, apparently. He's just standing in front of like this council of 3 other Spider-Man that look different. One of them is like a Reed Richards Spider-Man with the Fantastic Four logo, still wearing a mask. Another one's wearing like a white outfit. Another one has like a black outfit with red stripes. And they're basically just talking to each other, and they're like, oh, how can we help you, Spider-Man? And he's asking them like, yo, why does a lot of bad things like happen to me? And he's also asking for like advice on how he can cope and how he can deal with things from their experiences. The little council of 3 different Spider-Man are telling like, why do you think we would be able to help you out with that? And he's like, you're different Spider-Man, right? So you must have also issues of your own that you're dealing with. And so they start joking around. He doesn't know it, but they start joking around with them. They're like, no, we're all pretty much doing well with our lives, The Reed Richards Spider-Man has a Nobel Prize. The white-suited Spider-Man has, like, a few kids, and, he's living it up. And then the Council of Spider-Man ask this crowd of Spider-Man that are just hanging out underneath them if they could raise their hand if they consider their superhero life fulfilling. And of course, all of them raise their hand. And Peter Parker's like, y'all are fucking with me, right? And so the Council of Spider-Man are like joking with him. They're like, you're probably a really bad Spider-Man. You should consider hanging up your cape. They're just fucking with him for some reason. And he's like, oh, you guys are pulling my chain. And so all of them start laughing at him, and they explain to him how they've been fucking with him. And then Peter looks over at the Reed Richards Spider-Man and asks him like, oh, so no Nobel Prize, right? And he's like, no, I do have one, but they give one to everyone nowadays, so it's not that special. And then they go over to the white-suited Spider-Man, and they Peter asks him, and what about your kids? And he's like, honestly, they're not even my kids. But he took out his anger on Hydro Man the other day, so that's how he copes with having to deal with kids that aren't his. So, that opens a completely different concept for another crazy life Spider-Man. And then he looks over at the black-suited Spider-Man, with the red stripes. And he's like, what about your issues? And he's like, I got arthritis. And he's like, seriously? no, it's cancer. And so, it's like quiet for a moment. Peter's like, damn, bro. And the black suited Spider-Man's like, relax, dude, I was just kidding. It is arthritis. And he's about to walk through this portal, I'm assuming to go back to his universe, because that's what this seems like. He's just hanging out in a multi-dimensional area with a ton of other Spider-Man. I don't fucking know. But anyways, yeah, they open up this portal to send him back, and they're like, you really want to know why bad things are happening to you? It's not because of something you did or something you're doing wrong, and it sure ain't bad luck. You put yourself in the center of the storm every day, Peter. So complaining about the wind won't do you any good. Want to know how long you're gonna suffer? And then Peter responds, I think I know. And they go, of course you do. And you'll hold on for as long as it takes, for as long as they need you. When you fall, you get up every time. Why? Because you're Spider-Man. And that's how that story ends. To be honest, I don't like how that part ended. But I like the interaction, with the other multidimensional Spider-Man about... They just, they're just fucking with Peter. They're just like, yeah, dude, our lives are, like, perfect. You're probably the only the only Spider-Man that's, like, having a horrible life. But then, of course, they tell him they're just joking around, and they explain how, yeah, every single one of them has their own issues that they're dealing with, and I like that concept. But, yeah, the little ending about why they keep, torturing Spider-Man, they could have just left that out, to be honest, or just written it slightly different, but yeah, whatever, it works. Those were basically the only stories that I liked, sort of. I liked their first story that was about some burglar that kept trying to break into places and rob them during giant events, like, Galactus showing up, or like, for people that watch the movies, the Avengers, when Loki showed up to New York and destroyed everything. That's basically the time when he robs people, and that's when Spider-Man puts a stop to him, because he doesn't see him as like a regular burglar, because he's low tier. Because of his experiences with how Uncle Ben died, he still, goes after the little criminal so that no one else gets hurt, just like Uncle Ben did. That story was pretty cool, but it didn't hit as hard. And then there was a story about Spider-Man versus Conspiraton. Man, shit. So this story is about pretty much a ton of fake news is spreading out throughout the city. And the villain is like going around spraying this gas, this hallucinogen gas that tricks people into believing all this fake news, or imagining this fake news and believing it. Something like that. I didn't really like that. It felt meh. And then there was another one. This also felt kind of meh, where Spider-Man just like accidentally drops this ice cream on his suit when he's just trying to enjoy it, because he accidentally tried to eat it with his mask on, of course. It shows more of the life of Peter Parker, of him just taking regular New Yorker pictures and trying to sell them to the Daily Bugle. And of course JJ's like, oh dude, these are all garbage, except for the one accidental one where, he spilled ice cream on his suit. Apparently he wanted that one, and that's the one he's publishing on the newspaper. And then the story ends with Joe Robertson picking up a photo that JJ just, tossed on the ground, and saying how they're gonna put it on page 3 for a completely different article. But they don't show the picture or what he's talking about, and that one sort of just ends abruptly. I didn't quite like that one. It felt a little too boring. And then another one is titled "In the Flesh," is from the perspective of this like crazy person, right? Apparently she's scared of spiders. That's her phobia. She believes they're crawling out of her skin, her eyeballs, and whatnot. She can't sleep for whatever reason. And one day the asylum catches on fire, and she's having a struggle to trying to escape, because they're all insane, I guess. I don't know. This one was kind of difficult to interpret, but... And then in the flames, she sees this giant spider, so she's freaking the fuck out. When Peter takes off his mask, he tells her, like, oh yeah, dude, it's just me, don't worry. And then confuses her for Gwen somehow? I didn't understand that part, but Then they hug, and he takes her outside of the building somewhere safe where she can hang out with everyone else that got out. But I didn't understand the purpose of this story. It was weird. And then they had a random patient in the asylum that just burned to death in one of the panels. It was really weird to me. It didn't really feel like Spider-Man. And then there was another story that Neil Gaiman wrote where it's from his perspective as a kid and reading comics, and I'm sure it resonates with a ton of way older people than myself and how they grew up with, so I'm sure this is like a relatable story to them. Personally, not for me, so this one didn't really resonate with me much. And then the last story also didn't quite get me interested, but it looks like it's a team up between this superhero called the Rhino, not to be confused with the actual villain Rhino, but it's like a new superhero called Rhino, and Spider-Man's just like talking to him and giving him some pointers. Rhino's like, hey, we should team up sometimes. Spider-Man's like, nah, that's not really the thing I do. Then he goes off and explains to him with, any sort of power that you may have, even if you consider it not that good of a power compared to everyone else, to use it with responsibility. It all depends on how you use that power. So it's pretty much a story about this rookie superhero being taught a few lessons from Spider-Man. I liked it, but I don't understand why they had to call him the Rhino. It did confuse me at first. I'm like trying to figure out every sort of possible association with, the Spider-Man villain Rhino, but there was absolutely nothing. I don't know. They could have just gave him a different name, but whatever. That's what they decided to do. Yeah, that was basically it. That's Amazing Fantasy number 1000. Now, was that issue worth it? To be honest, I wouldn't have bought it this week if there was something else that was interesting to me. I only got it because this was literally the only thing that looked kind of appealing, so I was like, okay, well, let's pick it up, why not? It's the only thing I got for the week. Otherwise, to be honest, probably wouldn't have picked it up, but yeah, there was a few stories that were good, like the ones I talked about, but a good small portion of them, they were very meh. It had a few good moments, but for $7.99, nah, really. It wasn't that worth it to me, to be honest. But it was the only thing that was interesting for the week. So I'm like, whatever, let's pick it up and read it. I still got my somewhat worth out of it. Like the sequel to the previous story that was in Amazing Fantasy 15, that was pretty cool. And then seeing Elderly Spider-Man, that was also pretty cool. I love that. I loved seeing Elderly Spider-Man's ass. But anyways, yeah, those are basically my thoughts on Amazing Fantasy number 1000, this celebration for Spider-Man. Yeah, you can kind of guess the kind of stuff that would be in here, just moments in Spider-Man's life where they just sort of acknowledge what Spider-Man has gone through and why they continue torturing him. But like I said, it has its good stories, it has its meh stories. It did get me to pull out the facsimile of Amazing Fantasy number 15, just so I can read the first part of, the sequel that was in here. I really liked the part where they just incorporated Spider-Man into that story, being, just the sequel of it, but still, that was pretty cool. They did include Flash, Liz, and Betty into the story, but they were only in it for one panel, basically asking, "Oh, where's Peter?" How he always runs away whenever there's trouble, so he can suit up and deal with it. But yeah, if you enjoyed me talking about this week's Amazing Fantasy number 15, and probably want to hear me talk about more Spider-Man crap that's coming out within the next few months, be sure to just let me know by liking and subscribing. But anyways, peace.